Well, good morning and welcome to Coffee with the Pastor. Um, we're in Genesis chapter 20 today. And again, we're going to have a passage where, in my mind, Abraham fails to live up to his title of Father of our Faith. But I think I make a bigger deal out of it than maybe the Bible writer and God does. But in chapter 20, Abraham goes to a different region. He goes to the wilderness of Shur. I think he has to move around because, as the Bible explains, he has huge herds and flocks. And so I think they may run out of grassland. They have to go to another region and then come back. And he's kind of a nomad. He really is the only real estate he's ever going to own in the promised land will be a place to bury his dead, bury his wife. And also, he doesn't own places, so he has to go to open spaces. And so he goes into the wilderness of Shur, probably what will become Philistine territory later. And again, he tells Sarah to say that that Abraham's her brother, not husband. Now, it was technically true. She was his half-sister, but it was a deception because he was afraid that because of her great beauty that they would kill him so they could have Sarah. And so they go, and there's King Abimelech. He is struck by Sarah's beauty, and then he brings her into his household to marry her. And then the Bible teaches that God strikes him with an illness. And so he's unable to carry through the marrying Sarah because of his illness. And beyond that, his wives and his concubines are unable to have children. There's very huge plague on the house. And Sarah must have been there for a while in that household. And then God comes to Abimelech in a dream. Now, dreams are huge in the times of the Old Testament. We're going to see that with Joseph, you see it with Daniel, you see it with others. But even today in the Middle East, they put a lot more stock in their dreams than probably what we do. But Abimelech, God spoke to him and told him that he was doing wrong and that he was being judged because he had another man's wife, Sarah, in his house, and that he needed to give Sarah back to Abraham. And of course, Abimelech does. He confronts Abraham. Why did you do this? Why did you deceive me? And then, interesting enough, he pays Abraham some money because he did it. And again, it's one of those things where you just look and think, come on, Abraham, have some faith. Tell people that she's your wife and all. So this not only happens once, but it happens twice. It happened in Egypt with Pharaoh, and now it happens with Abimelech. I don't believe that the scripture is chronologically correct in it, and some of you may just need to get over that. The Bible just isn't chronologically in order. That's true of the Old Testament and New Testament. If you look at the Gospels, one of the Gospels will have a miracle or a teaching in one place, and it would be placed in a different timeline in another Gospel. And that's because they're telling the story, and they're knitting everything together. And that's true especially with the Torah teacher. They're telling the story, and there's been patterns noticed by scholars among the years. Even in the individual accounts, there will be like an A, B, C, D, and then it will come to a climax, and then he'll work it back out. C, B, A, or whatever. And I think that the timing of this passage, he's putting right before the birth of Isaac to make a point. Now, I have doubts about Abimelech being attracted to a 90-year-old Sarah. Now, forgive me for that, but I just kind of doubt that. I think that the chronology there, but why would it be placed here? Well, there's two observations I make about going on. Number one, twice, Sarah's almost had to marry somebody else besides Abraham. Once the Pharaoh of Egypt, now this king of Abimelech. But God keeps it from happening both times. And remember the promise. The promise is that Abraham's going to be a great nation, the father of many nations, and it's going to come, and he's got a promised blessing, and the blessing is going to come from a child that's born from him and Sarah. Well, that would have been completely blown if it hadn't been for Pharaoh and for Abimelech. Now, when we read it, we're just all over Abraham. Well, how could you do that? Why would you do that? Why would you have such a lack of faith? But as you read it carefully, God really doesn't get on to Abraham real hard about that. He doesn't, the writer doesn't really condemn him. In fact, with Abimelech's case, he says, Abraham's a prophet, give back his wife, ask Abraham to pray for you, you'll be healed, your wives will have children again, everything will be fine. And that's what happens. So he doesn't do that, but I think this real story here is that God intervenes. God's got a plan. God's got a providence that Abraham and Sarah are going to be the parents of the one that's the line that's going to bring the blessing. Of course, in the New Testament, Paul talks about this blessing in Galatians, and he says that blessing through this line is Jesus Christ would be the ultimate blessing that will happen through that line. But he talks very much about how, but God protects that Sarah doesn't have sexual relationship with anybody else but Abraham. And it very easily could have happened, but God intervenes. I think that's the real story, that God intervened in that. I also find it interesting, and this is another observation I make, it seems like every time Abraham has a very great experience with God, it's followed up by him kind of faltering. He falters with the Pharaoh after having such a great experience and following God and obeying God and doing all the things he's done. And then he goes to Egypt and just seems like, okay, lie to everybody, tell them you're my sister. Same thing with Abimelech. It's placed right after he's been visited. So the writer is making it very interesting that there's a great experience with God, then he kind of falters. Great experience with God, falters. Great experience with God, falters. And so that's kind of how I think we live our lives a lot. A lot of times we're on a roller coaster spiritually. We have a great experience with God, and then we kind of go down, and then we kind of come up, and then we kind of go down. What we'd like to do is kind of stay there, but it seems like nobody does. But I think we can take heart from Abraham. Number one, we can trust God. He's going to work out the things that he needs to work out for us. He had promised a child to Abraham and Sarah. That would have been really hard if she'd have married the Pharaoh. Been really hard if she would have married Abimelech. God intervened. We see that sometimes Abraham maybe doesn't keep his faith as strong as he should, but he always comes back to that faith. And so we see today that God's always faithful, and he'll be faithful with you today. He'll intervene for you today on the things that you need to be intervened for. And you can trust him on that. Well, I hope you have a great day, and tomorrow we'll look at this promised child Isaac being born, and we'll be looking at chapter 21 if you want to read ahead. So blessings upon you today, and make it a great day.